Toolbox Talks, Hazard Communication, Labeling. The purpose of chemical labels is to convey information using quick visual notations to alert the user and to provide immediate recognitions of the hazards. Labels must also provide instructions on how to handle the chemical, so that users are informed on how to protect themselves. All hazardous chemical containers must be labeled at all Wausau Supply Company locations. These can be original manufacturer's labels or secondary container labeling. Labels must never be defaced, and reasonable attempts should be made to ensure they remain in good condition. Any container which contains a hazardous chemical for greater than 8 hours must have a chemical label. There are several types of labels that might be found on hazardous chemicals in the workplace, including Hazard Communication Standard (GHS) shipping labels, Hazard Communication Standard workplace labels, National Fire Protection Association 704 labels, Hazardous Materials Information Systems labels, and Department of Transportation shipping labels and markings. The term label is defined as an appropriate group of written, printed, or graphic information elements concerning a hazardous chemical that is affixed to, printed on, or attached to the immediate container of a hazardous chemical, or to the outside packaging. Required elements of a GHS shipping label include product identifier, supplier identification, hazard pictograms, signal word, hazard statements, precautionary statements, and supplemental information. Product identifiers. How the hazardous chemical is identified, as shown here on the top. Supplier identification, which is the contact information for the responsible party, as shown here on the bottom. Hazard pictograms. A pictogram is a composition that may include a symbol plus other graphic elements, such as a border, background pattern, or color, that is intended to convey specific information about the hazard of the chemical. 8 pictograms are designated under this standard for application to a hazard category. Under HAZCOM 2012, pictograms are black symbols on a white background with a red diamond border. Pictograms are an important addition to the hazard communication tools in the standard. A pictogram draws the attention of the label reader, and everyone should be aware that the appearance of a pictogram in a red diamond frame means that a hazard concern is present in the product. Some of the pictograms in the standard have symbols that resemble the hazardous effect, while others are merely meant to attract attention. Pictograms may be used for several different hazardous effects as well. Pictograms include health hazard, which is a warning for carcinogen, mutagenicity, reproductive toxicity, respiratory sensitizer, target organ toxicity, and aspiration toxicity. Flame, which is a warning for flammables, pyrophorics, self-heating, emits flammable gas, self-reactives, and organic peroxides. Exclamation mark, which is a warning for skin and eye irritant, skin sensitizer, harmful acute toxicity, narcotic effects, respiratory tract irritant, and hazardous to the ozone layer. Gas cylinder, which is a warning for gases under pressure. Corrosion, which is a warning for skin corrosion, burns, eye damage, and corrosive to metals. exploding bomb, which is a warning for explosives, self-reactives, and organic peroxides. Flame over circle, which is a warning for oxidizers. Environment, which is not mandatory, is a warning for aquatic toxicity. And skull and crossbones, which is a warning for acute toxicity, which could be fatal or toxic. Signal word. A signal word is a word used to indicate the relative level of severity of hazard and alert the reader to a potential hazard on the label. The signal words used in the standard are danger and warning. Danger is used for the more severe hazards, while warning is used for the less severe hazards. If there are multiple hazards, the word that indicates the highest severity level is used. Hazard statement. A hazard statement is a statement assigned to a hazard class and category that describes the nature of the hazards of the chemical, including, where appropriate, the degree of the hazard. Example is fatal if swallowed. The hazard statements for the hazardous chemical describes the hazard in text in a simple, direct manner. There is a hazard statement for each hazard category of a hazard class, and it will vary depending on the degree of the hazard. As an example, extremely flammable gas is a hazard statement for flammability. The hazard statement conveys that the chemical has a low flash point and is ignitable at low volumes in air. Precautionary statement. The precautionary statement is a phrase that describes recommended measures that should be taken to minimize or prevent adverse effects resulting from exposure to a hazardous chemical or improper storage or handling. An example would be, keep away from heat and open flames and no smoking when using this product. Precautionary statements are key to helping you decide what you need to do to protect your workers and your workplace. There are 4 types of statements: prevention, response, storage, disposal. Using GHS labels. All chemical containers must have a label. If you identify a container without a label, whether the original label has been damaged or it is a secondary container, blank labels are available to properly label the container. When utilizing the GHS label, first, the chemical name is identified at the top. An example would be Diamond Coat paint. Second, we need to identify the signal word. Example, for Diamond Coat, this is labeled as warning. Lastly, we need to identify all pictograms applicable to the chemical. For Diamond Coat, there is only one pictogram, which is the exclamation mark. Now the label is ready to be placed on the container. The GHS label for secondary containers will be Wausau Supply's preferred secondary label type. The reason for this is that the information needed for the label is easily retrievable on all SDSs, where other types, which we will discuss later in the training, are not widely available on all SDSs. Alternative workplace labels covered in this section are also acceptable labels. However, please know that the information necessary to promptly complete the label may not be as widely available. Alternative workplace labels are permitted by regulatory agencies, but must provide general information regarding hazards associated with the chemical, and the label must not conflict with GHS hazard warnings or pictograms. Some examples of widely used alternative workplace labels, including the NFPA, Diamond, and the HMIS label, are shown to the right. The NFPA 704 Diamond label is typically located outside buildings, on doors, or on tanks and is intended to provide visible information about hazards to emergency responders during incidents such as a spill or fire. The diamond shape of the overall symbol identifies the hazards of the material and the severity of the hazards in an arrangement of smaller color-coded diamonds, which represents the hazards, each of which has a numerical rating system, which represents the severity of the hazard. It is important to understand that the numbers used in the NFPA rating system are not relative ratings to the OSHA classification numbers and in fact are inverse. The NFPA rating system ranges from 0 to 4, with 0 being the least hazardous and 4 being the most hazardous, whereas OSHA's classification system ranges from 1 to 4, with 1 being most severe and 4 being least severe. The red diamond represents the flammable hazards. The blue diamond represents the health hazards. The yellow diamond represents the instability hazards. And the white diamond represents the other special hazards. The Hazardous Materials Information System, HMIS, was developed by the American Coatings Association to support in-plant labeling compliance with the Hazardous Communication Standard. The top space of the label is to identify the product. This label also includes color-coded bars and a numerical scale of 0 to 4 like the NFPA label. The blue bar indicates health hazards. 0 is no significant risk. 1 is possible irritation or minor injury. 2 is temporary or minor injury may occur. 3 is major injury likely without prompt medical attention. And 4 is life-threatening or permanent damage due to signal or repeated exposure. Note that there are 2 spaces in the health bar. The second space is used to signify chronic health hazards, which is indicated by the presence of an asterisk and warns of health problems due to long-term exposure. The red bar indicates flammability hazards. 0 will not burn. 1 is a preheated flash point above 200 degrees. 2 is flash point between 100 and 200 degrees. 3 is flash point between 73 and 100 degrees. And 4 has flash points below 73 degrees and boiling points below 100 degrees. The orange bar indicates physical hazards. 0 represents non-explosive and normally stable under fire, while 4 represents that something is readily explosive even at normal temperatures and pressure. And white indicates personal protective equipment required for safe handling with the codes and icons shown at the right. In closing, remember that chemical labels are to alert and immediately recognize hazards of a material. All containers of hazardous materials must be labeled. Secondary labels are available, and it is everyone's responsibility to ensure everything is labeled. See your supervisor for secondary labels as needed and know there are multiple types of workplace labels. However, no label may conflict with the GHS label elements. So in review, all of the below labels are acceptable as workplace labels. However, which is the preferred label at Wausau Supply Company? A. True or false? All hazardous chemical containers must have a manufacturer's label, shipping label, or workplace label. True. Remember that many potential injuries can be prevented by taking the appropriate precautions and making sure we are following the company's instructions in regard to hazard communications and the labeling of containers.